Perhaps you've arrived here out of curiosity, or maybe because something deep within you stirred at the mention of the word empath. If so, understand this: we do not gather merely to share stories of sensitivity or emotional fragility. No, our purpose reaches much further. We are here to summon the old rhythms, the deep ancestral codes buried beneath what the modern world casually labels as feelings. When I speak of the empath, I am not referring to a kind-hearted individual who simply mirrors the emotions of others. I am speaking of a channel, a vessel through which the invisible tides of the collective unconscious surge. This role is not always graceful. Popular culture tends to glamorize empathy, polishing it into something soft and palatable. But the truth is, when a concept becomes too easily accepted, it often loses its original force. The empath, as I have encountered in dreams, visions, and long silences, is not some smiling, ethereal figure. They are burden-bearers, silent carriers of pain that is not theirs to begin with. Many do not even realize the ancient energies moving through them. To truly grasp this, one must go deeper, not just into personal experience or even relational dynamics, but beneath all that. For the empath is not merely someone with heightened emotional awareness. They are a kind of tuning fork, responding not just to individuals, but to the primal patterns behind them. Picture a healer from an old world, kneeling during a storm, coughing blood not from illness, but because the earth itself is wounded. That is the empath. They absorb, transform, and carry energy that does not originate within them. If they remain unconscious of this, it will consume them from within. I remember a dream from years ago. Before I had the words to describe such forces, a woman stood on a narrow bridge over a deep abyss. She had no eyes, her arms stretched forward, part pleading, part shielding. From the darkness below rose countless voices, weeping, yearning, frightened. Though she could not see them, she felt every cry inside her own flesh, each one cutting her like a blade. This is the empath. Her blindness is symbolic. She cannot perceive the roots of her suffering. She absorbs pain without knowing its source. She is porous, yet no one has taught her how to cleanse. There is danger in being receptive without wisdom. The unconscious does not deal in morality. It is both divine and destructive. When an empath opens to another person's inner world, whether out of love or simply by proximity, they allow in more than just emotion. They open to that person's unspoken history, to their hidden wounds and long-buried fears. And most people, knowingly or not, are haunted by pieces of themselves they've never accepted. What is unloved within one person often seeks sanctuary in someone else, and the empath becomes that sanctuary if they are not careful. There's an old tale from African tribal tradition. A young seer wandered the forest's edge, drawn by the cries of spirits without names. These beings didn't speak in words, but in sudden floods of emotion, grief, terror, longing. The boy would burst into tears without warning, tremble without cause, or laugh in silence. The villagers feared possession and called for the elder. But the elder didn't drive the spirits away. He taught the boy how to speak with them, how to name them. That is the message I pass on to you now. To be an empath without clarity is to become a stage for the unresolved dramas of others. But to recognize what you carry, to give name and shape to what moves through you, that is the work of transformation. It is not enough to say, I feel others' pain. You must ask, why do I feel it? From where does it arise? Asterisk, asterisk, it enters quietly, and before you know it, it begins to move through you. Well, what are you doing with it? Empathy is not always a sweet sentiment. It can be a subtle possession. The unconscious doesn't always announce itself with horns or fire. Sometimes it arrives as tenderness so powerful it swallows you whole. Sometimes it arrives as a drive to help so relentless it erodes your limits. Sometimes it disguises itself as love for someone whose shadow has fastened itself to your spirit and confused your body for its final resting place. I have witnessed empaths fall into devotion with the very people breaking them, not because they are weak, but because they have been magnetically pulled into the pain of the other. They sense it, absorb it, and in doing so, become the nurse, the rescuer, the quiet absorber. But there is a hidden contract in that, a dark inversion I've called enantiodroa, the reversal, where the healer becomes the one harmed. The light bearer becomes the shadow bearer. And the longer this hidden loop runs, the more the empath loses their grip on who they are beneath it all. If you identify as an empath, understand that your sensitivity is more than emotional, it's psychic, archetypal. You are tuned not only to personal feelings but to deep, ancient tides moving through humanity itself. When someone comes near, you don't just feel their expression or sorrow, you absorb their ancestral echoes, their spiritual inheritance, their unlived desires. And if you haven't met your own inner world, if you haven't walked through the depths of your own psyche, you will be consumed. Many in spiritual circles idealize sensitivity, wear it like a crown. But in the language of the soul, no gift is without its shadow. Empathy may be the most shadow-drawing gift of all, because light, wherever it shines, casts shadow. What becomes of suppressed rage after years? It doesn't vanish, it lingers, it waits for a new container. And when such a person filled with dormant fury meets an empath who hasn't owned their own hidden anger, the rage ignites, it leaps like sparks. On dry brush, the empath, unaware, feels sudden irritation, despair, heat, not knowing they're carrying fire that doesn't belong to them. There was a woman who came to me once. She wept the moment she walked into the room before any words. At first, she believed her pain came from her past, her parents, her lovers, her disappointments. And while there was truth in that, something deeper slowly emerged. Through months of dissent, we uncovered a truth. She was crying the unshed tears of generations. Her mother, her grandmother, a lineage of women denied their right to mourn. She had become a channel for sorrow that was never hers to carry. And that haunting inheritance, she lost the ability to feel what was hers. If you're an empath, know this: if you don't clearly define what belongs to you and what doesn't, you'll be swallowed by ghosts that don't bear your name. The ability to feel is sacred, but sacredness requires containment. The vessel must be able to hold the flame or the flame will consume it. Let me share a dream. A man stands inside a vast cathedral made of mirrors. As he walks, the sound of each step echoes with voices he doesn't recognize. He looks into one mirror, expecting his reflection, and instead sees a crying child. Another shows a soldier mid-scream. Another an old woman taking her last breath. Face after face stares back, unfamiliar. He begins to scream, "Which one is me?" But the mirrors stay silent, reflecting only what they hold. This, too, is the empath lost in the endless reflections of others' pain. Unsure of the shape of their own soul, if this echoes within you, ask yourself, what real inner work have you done to meet yourself, not through slogans or identity tags, but in the honest heat of inner confrontation? Have you entered your own shadow's lair and sat with it? Have you questioned your impulse to help? Is it about love? Or is it sometimes about needing to feel special, wanted, even saintly? Have you recognized the darker satisfaction that can arise when you're the only one who understands someone else's suffering? Yes, even empathy is not immune to ego. Often, the urge to heal others masks a fear of sitting with our own silence. The burden of holding everyone else's pain can feel easier than facing our own. We are complex creatures. We drape avoidance in the robes of virtue, and the unconscious ever slice miles behind the curtain. Empathy is not a rescue mission. It is a gateway, and to walk through it wisely, you must master the craft of boundaries, not walls built of fear, but a membrane built of soul clarity. Boundaries that say, I feel you, but I am not you. That say, I see your pain, but I will not enshrine it in myself. That say, I offer presence, not possession. This, I believe, is the ultimate path, not to absorb in others' story, but to honor it with witnessing. Because there is no tragedy greater for the empath than vanishing from their own life, dissolving so fully into another's wounds that they forget their own soul sound. And yet, this happens every single day. In relationships where one partner becomes the emotional mule. In families where the empath is cast as the unspoken therapist. In communities where feeling deeply becomes an unpaid job. This is not the path of healing. It is the path of forgetting. And it is time perhaps for you, perhaps for us all, to remember. In many families, the most emotionally sensitive child unknowingly becomes the one who regulates the emotional climate for everyone else. You see it too in therapists, clergy, and educators who can't tell the difference between real compassion and entangled dependency. But this confusion isn't innocent, it's a kind of archetypal possession. The empath who hasn't done deep inner work becomes swallowed by the ancient pattern of the wounded healer Chiron from myth. And when Chiron rises unchecked in the psyche, it turns pain into purpose, suffering into identity. You start to believe your worth is in your ability to suffer for or with others. This is a distortion, a shadow version of healing, where your sense of self becomes chained not to transformation, but to the endless recycling of others' wounds. The empath doesn't lose themselves out of love, they lose themselves because the archetype takes control. Archetypes aren't just poetic metaphors, they are ancient forces, older than words, older than culture, moving beneath the surface of our lives. When you feel an overpowering urge to help someone, when you leave a room drained, when someone's need makes you feel alive, pause. These may not be your emotions, these may be old collective patterns moving through you. The archetype of the rescuer, the martyr, the nurturer, even the seducer. These roles can animate the unguarded empath like invisible strings pulling a puppet. But puppets can't evolve, they perform. To reclaim your wholeness, you must do the sacred and terrifying work of separation. This isn't a separation from love, it's a separation from enmeshment. It's not about apathy, it's about presence with boundaries. It is the soul-backed strength to look into the pain of another and say, I will not leave you, but I will not bleed for you. To feel the weight of someone's hidden sorrow and say, I will stay beside you, but I will not drown. There is an image I return to, one shared by a dreamer in therapy. A forest, ancient, with gnarled roots like tendrils reaching through time. In its center, a stone well dark and endless. Round it sit empaths, hands clutched to their hearts, tears falling freely, and inside the well, the silhouettes of those they love. The empaths hope, if they cry hard enough, love deeply enough, they can lift these shadows into light. But the well has no bottom and their tears only deepen it. This is what happens when empathy becomes compulsion. It begins to nourish the very darkness it seeks to dispel. There is a truth few want to admit: not everyone wants to heal. Not every soul is ready for the light. And when the empath mistakes their gift for duty, they will try to save those who resist salvation and slowly lose themselves in the process. You must ask, does your empathy free others or bind you? Does it respect another's journey or override it by insisting they change? Even care, when fueled by fear, can become control. There are parents whose love smothers, partners whose attunement manipulates, friends who make themselves indispensable only to avoid their own loneliness. This is the dark side of empathy, where tenderness becomes transaction and emotional. Attunement becomes a way to gain power. You may flinch at this, not me, you think. But if you truly are empathic, you must turn that sensitivity inward. Ask yourself, where has my gift become a mask? Where have I equated caring with obligation? Where have I made myself vital to others so I wouldn't have to face the ache of being alone? This is not condemnation. This is the doorway to integration. Because genuine empathy is not about absorbing pain, it is about holding space for it without losing your footing. It is the skill of being near someone's agony without being consumed, not through detachment, but through deep anchoring in your own self. And what is the self? It is not just your tenderness, not just your warmth, but your darkness too, your instinct, your ancestry, your future self, your forgotten pieces. The self is not an abstract concept. It is the gravitational center of your inner world. Around this center, archetypes revolve. When the empath finds this inner core, they stop leaking energy, they root. And from this rootedness, real compassion emerges, not as martyrdom, but as quiet, unshakable power. But to get there, you must ascend. The empath must enter the underworld of their own psyche. They must face the parts of themselves that crave to be needed. The parts that cling so tightly out of terror of being left behind, that they become what others need, at the cost of becoming a stranger to themselves. Many who confuse intimacy with punishment aren't broken, they're surviving. These are not flaws, but deeply rooted responses to childhood wounds, shaped in homes where sensitivity was either dismissed or weaponized. I've worked with people whose empathy wasn't some divine blessing, but a skill forged in pain. The girl who studied her father's mood swings to avoid his rage. The boy who learned to soothe his mother's depression with a well-timed joke. These children became empaths out of necessity. What they later called a gift was often vigilance wrapped in fear. But a gift born in fear must be cleansed. You have to ask, who was I before the world trained me to prioritize everyone else's emotions? What part of me still equates love with suffering? What if I stopped carrying other people's pain? Would I still be lovable? These aren't philosophical musings. They are thresholds of transformation. And this is where the empath faces their deepest initiation: to feel deeply without falling apart, to love fiercely without losing themselves, to help without becoming hollow, to witness suffering without becoming a reflection of it. This isn't about shutting down. It's about becoming whole. Mastery, not detachment. Let me offer one image before we go further. Though many more stir beneath the surface, picture a woman before a fire, clutching a bowl. All around her a storm screams, winds lashing, voices crying, injustice swirling like ash. But she doesn't flinch. She kneels, lowers the bowl filled with her own tears to the ground, and whispers not to the storm, but to herself, "I feel you, but I am not you." And just like that, the storm begins to quiet. Not because she took it in, but because she reclaimed herself. This is the essence of the true empath, not the sponge, but the chalice, not the martyr, but the mystic, not the rescuer, but the reflection. As we go deeper into this inner landscape, we begin to drift into the world of dreams. There, empathy shows itself in raw form, stripped of ego's filters. In dreams, it's not sweet or flattering, it's symbolic, elemental, and untamed. I remember a brilliant, tender young man who came to me claiming the title of empath. Every room he entered pressed on his chest like invisible hands. He couldn't rest if someone nearby was in pain, but he wasn't thriving, he was vanishing. His soul felt like it was dissolving into every person's sorrow. He didn't come seeking answers, he came because he was afraid he was fading. One night, he dreamt he stood at the edge of a cave. From within, screams echoed. Faces of lost loved ones floated in the shadows, each one whispering his name. A child clung to him. A man bled at his feet. A woman reached out with hands like ash. He tried to flee, but was frozen. Then from the heart of the cave came a whisper, not a cry, but something deeper. "You made this your temple." That line wasn't symbolic. It was his unconscious naming the truth. He had built an inner cathedral out of anguish. He had confused pain with purpose. His compassion had turned him into a sanctuary for grief. But the soul cannot flourish in a chapel of ghosts. Dreams show what we cannot face by daylight. And for the empath, they expose the silent bargains we make with pain. If I hurt with them, they'll feel less alone. If I absorb their rage, they won't lash out. If I disappear, they'll finally breathe. But the soul does not reward silent martyrdom. It demands balance. It demands truth. It demands that we look ourselves in the face and choose wholeness. So, the empath must begin the sacred work of reclaiming all they've scattered, not to hoard or harden, but to become whole again, to be sovereign. This is where the journey truly begins, the path of individuation. It's the lifelong becoming of who you truly are, not a mask, not a reflection, not a bundle of old wounds or projections, but a self that is solid, complete, and entirely yours. For the empath, the path begins the moment they stop mistaking their erosion for compassion and start choosing themselves. The real battle is not with others, but with the forgotten parts of oneself, the fragments banished long ago. In order to feel for everyone else, the empath must journey inward, into their own inner wilderness, and ask, what is my anger trying to reveal? What secrets lie beneath my grief? What part of me is clinging to the identity of the wounded one? And even more bravely, what part of me is addicted to saving others from their wounds? This path is not comfortable. It tears through illusions and dismantles the idealized mask of the noble helper, exposing raw truths beneath the healer's hands. It demands the empath to stop bleeding on altars that were never theirs to worship at, and even more terrifying, to allow others the dignity of their own suffering. Make no mistake, conscious empathy is sacred, but unconscious empathy becomes a kind of pollution. It collapses the energetic boundary between self and other. It is the flooding of one's soul with emotional echoes that are not one's own. And those echoes run deeper than we often realize. In many empaths, we find emotional entanglements that reach back generations, sensitivities passed down like antique treasures, now burdens instead of blessings. A woman may feel panicked in modern cities without realizing her great-grandmother once channeled spirits for an entire village. A man may feel ashamed of his intuition, not knowing his ancestors were executed for their gifts. Unprocessed grief becomes a haunting ancestral sorrow seeking a voice in a descendant who feels too much and understands too little. Unless this descendant awakens, unless they choose to feel with clarity, they simply become another mouthpiece for repetition. In their dreams, archetypes speak in riddles of the soul, serpents curled tightly around hearts, oceans swallowing innocent children, ancient homes engulfed in flames while the dreamer stands helpless. These are not random images. They are cries. From the deeper psyche, you are filled with what does not belong to you. I remember a patient and artist with a gift for beauty and pain. She dreamed often of wandering through a museum. Inside stood statues of people she had loved, parents, partners, friends. Each one bore a sign, "Do not touch, property of the dead." Yet she touched them, always, and each bled in return. This dream wasn't a punishment, it was a message. Her empathy had twisted into necromancy, a constant reaching into pain not hers to carry. She didn't need less emotion, she needed discernment. Some suffering is sacred to witness, some is sacred to leave buried. When empaths remain unaware, they become excavators of pain not meant to be revived. They roam emotional graveyards, mistaking every echo for a soul to save. But not all wounds want healing, some want to fade. To interfere is to assume a role not ours. To meddle in mysteries too vast to understand. So what's the answer? To shut down, close our hearts, detach? No. The answer is transformation, refinement. To change empathy from a soft sponge into a sharp blade, from a weeping wound into a silent mirror. To evolve from sacrifice into sacredness. A true empath is not weak. A true empath is forged. They have stared into the abyss of their own suffering, embraced their unmet needs, conversed with their rage, their guilt, and their fear. Because of that, they no longer mistake feeling for fixing. They can witness without drowning, love without losing themselves. Their empathy becomes a gift, not a curse, a lantern that lights without burning. They guide without pulling, hold space without vanishing into it, and above all, they know their purpose is not to carry the burden of the world, but to carry themselves with such wholeness that the world remembers how to stand on its own. We do not arrive at the edge of despair, we arrive at the doorway of transformation. Every word spoken, every truth pulled from the hidden chambers of your being, now asks not to be admired or dissected, but lived. The empath who is brave, the dark, who has looked into themselves with unwavering honesty, does not emerge shattered or resigned to a life of emotional absorption. They become something much more rare, a grounded force, a walking truth. They understand now that empathy is not about taking in suffering. It is about changing it. It is not absorption, it is transmutation. It is the fire that witnesses suffering without clinging to it, honors it without inheriting it, transforms it without possessing it. Once awakened, the empath stops entering spaces looking for sorrow to fix. They no longer carry the silent burden of trying to heal everyone. Instead, they become living mirrors, not the kind that reflect back pain, but those that help others see the truth of themselves, the pieces they forgot, the strength buried beneath their wounds. These are the ones I call the scarred mystics, not because they bleed still, but because their scars are living emblems of having faced their inner depths and returned with knowing. But there is a quiet danger here. As the empowered empath rises, another presence stirs from the deep, the magician, this one who has pierced illusion, who knows the secret flow of energy, who can stand before another's shadow without turning away. But if this magician forgets humility, they drift. They begin to believe they've transcended pain. Insight seduces them. Wisdom becomes a weapon. Empathy, once sacred, is twisted into subtle control. And so, the cycle begins again, this time hidden beneath polished words and spiritual masks. So beware, becoming conscious is not an end. It is not a badge to wear. It is a devotion to daily self-awareness. To be an awakened empath is to rise each day with questions not as doubts, but as signs of discernment. Is this pain mine? Am I feeling or fusing? Am I helping or controlling? Am I truly here or playing a role? These are not the questions of someone unsure. These are the markers of someone finally rooted. The awakened empath no longer rushes in with bandages. They no longer fear silence. They do not run from another's brokenness or try to patch it over. They honor the psyche's wisdom. They know that sometimes the wound is not the enemy, it is the entrance. And what of love? Here too, the landscape shifts, the unconscious. Empath is drawn to those in chaos, to the manipulative, the needy, the ones who echo their childhood pain, not out of ignorance, but because part of them still believes they must prove they are worthy by enduring the storm. They are pulled to lovers who reflect the forgotten child within the one who learned that love came with pain. But when that empath wakes up, they begin to desire something different. They want to be seen, not used. They search for relationships not built on damage, but on truth. And when loneliness shows up, they no longer fill it with the ache of lost souls. They sit in its stillness. They listen. They let it speak. In that space, the empath reclaims their sacred gift. They stop filtering their intuition to soothe others. They stop twisting themselves to avoid being left. They understand that saying no is not cruelty, it is preservation of their inner flame. I once dreamt of a lake vast, still, and silver. Along its shore stood people I had known, clients, teachers, versions of myself. Each stared into the water, hoping for revelation. At its center stood a figure, unmoved by breeze or wave. They did not speak, yet those who looked into their eyes saw themselves, not their wounds, not their fears, but their possibility. This, I believe, is the calling of the awakened empath, not to echo pain, but to awaken potential, not to walk as a martyr, but as a reminder, not to feel everything, but to feel what is true. They no longer try to bear the world's hurt. Instead, they carry truth, and in that carrying, they do not abandon feeling, they elevate it, they refine it. They become what true alchemy has always pointed toward, the fusion of what was once divided, the heart and the spine, the open hand and the rooted feet, the healer and the human. So if these words strike something in you, if your own dreams have whispered of overgiving, of sacred fatigue, of emotional hunger, then this is not an accusation, it is a threshold. Step back from shadows that are not yours. Turn inward. Face what you have long avoided. Speak with the parts of yourself that fused in order to survive. Bless them, thank them, and then let them go. You are not a sponge. You are not a sacrifice. You are not broken to make others comfortable. You are a sacred space, a place where pain becomes meaning, a space where empathy is not swallowed, but shaped, a space where wisdom arises not from suffering alone, but from what suffering taught you. And if you can hold this glowing edge, this tender strength, then you will not just survive your sensitivity. You will sanctify it. You will move among the lost, no longer consumed by their ghosts. You will feel without drowning. You will care without collapsing. And most of all, you will come home to yourself not as a rescuer, but as a soul made whole.